While studios like Disney are flopping on a regular right now, Sony has taken the initiative to churn out the best animated heroes. But it wasn't always like this. Just a few years ago, Sony was making generic heroes like Boog from Open Season, and sometimes they even made terrible ones like Jean from the Emoji Movie. Fast forward to today, and we have the likes of Miles Morales and the three chicks in K-pop Demon Hunters who have stamped their names among the greatest heroes ever. And all this became possible after Sony developed some cheat codes that changed everything for them. But what are these secrets really? And why is every other studio trying to copy it for their future projects? To answer our questions, we need to go back to what it was before Sony, which we knew for creating electronics, started making animations. When Masaru Ibuka and Akio Morita founded Sony in post-war Japan in 1946, they had one plan summarized as follows: to be pioneers, to take on new fields, and build a corporate group recognized around the world. This meant they didn't want to limit themselves to just the tech industry. Hence, after years of success in engineering and telecommunications, they ventured into other big industries like music and gaming. So it made sense why they also went into the film industry in 1989 by acquiring Columbia Pictures. But here's what's crazy. In 2001, Sony considered selling Sony Pictures Imageworks, its visual effects facility. However, seeing how successful Shrek and Monsters, Inc. were at the box office, they changed their mind. Therefore, on May 9, 2002, Sony Pictures Animation was born. The studio's origin story is important because it reveals a deeper truth. Sony Pictures Animation wasn't exactly a passion project created to tell unique stories, but more of a practical business decision made to capture a piece of a lucrative market. Its creative arm was a reaction to the successes of others, and this defined their early creative productions. This business model manifested in the studio's first feature film, Open Season, which was released in September 2006. Obviously, this excludes the first short films released in 2002 and 2003. That said, Open Season wasn't entirely a disaster. It pulled 48% on Rotten Tomatoes and 6.1 out of 10 on IMDb. But it did gross an impressive $200.8 million on an $85 million budget. This meant that Sony got what they wanted, money. Whereas creatively, well, not so much. The story is about the hero Boog, a grizzly bear who lives a spoiled life in a park ranger's garage. Things change when Elliot, a skinny, fast-talking deer, talks him into leaving that comfort to try life in the wild. The problem is that Boog has no survival skills, so he has to learn how to be a real bear and rally the other animals to fight back against hunters.
Now let's kick some hunter bahookie!
Boog's whole character is built around what he doesn't have, and that makes him feel like a reflection of Sony's early style, movies shaped less by strong ideas and more by filling the screen with safe, predictable tropes. But how about we give them the benefit of the doubt, as Open Season was their first baby? Okay, cool. Maybe the second one would be better. Well, not exactly. Surf's Up, released in 2007, gave us Cody Maverick, who had a better personality than Boog, not to mention the mockumentary pattern of the film, giving him another interesting edge. However, Cody was still an underdog archetype that characterized the heroes in Shrek, Chicken Run, A Bug's Life, and many others before him. So yeah, another generic hero. The first sequels of Open Season had another primary protagonist in Elliot, Boog's best friend, but even his character couldn't save the movie from the generic hero curse. When Boog reclaimed that position as the main character in 2011 for Open Season 3, nothing had improved either. But nothing told Sony they needed to up their game better than the disaster that came around 6 years later, the Emoji Movie, a catastrophe in every sense, including its hero.
I gotta be meh.
A common misconception about the film is that Jean is a meh emoji who wants to be happy, but this is factually incorrect. Gene's character is actually an emoji whose supposed malfunction is his inability to stick to a single emotion, causing issues in his community. This simple detail is critical because it reveals that Gene's heroic journey is to fix his fundamental flaw and conform to the expectations of his world. Instead of a character with a flaw, he is the flaw. This makes his story the purest form of a hero defined by what he lacks. The writing only makes this hollow premise worse. Gene is a painfully generic, cliched protagonist who's a total karma Houdini. A karma Houdini, just so you know, usually means a villain who gets away with little or no punishment for their wrongdoing. This was exactly Gene's arc. He's the source of nearly all the film's problems, from almost getting the main character's phone deleted to causing the deaths of several characters. Yet, he gets away with everything and is celebrated as a hero in the end. The whole movie is a messy plot that fails to deliver a real message and seems to insult its audience. This is why the backlash was universal, and Sony knew that things really had to change for the better. But the crazy thing is they didn't even have to look that far for a solution, because just a few years back, they had the formula for designing an epic hero. Let's talk about Flint Lockwood, because he's the first sign that Sony could actually create a hero who didn't feel like the typical one we were used to. His journey is about proving his worth to a world that has only ever seen him as a nuisance. This sounds like the cliché underdog story, yes, but there's more. Flint's motivation, rooted in a deep sense of making the world a better place through his inventions, his strained relationship with his dad, and his awkwardness, immediately lifts him out of the generic zone. His inventions really hit home because they are extensions of who he is. Spray-on shoes that never come off, rat birds, machines that do more harm than good. Every single one mirrors his awkwardness and his hunger to solve problems in a way people will finally notice. The big food machine, the FLDSMDFR, is a great metaphor for Flint's need to be loved and respected. What grounds the story even more is his relationship with his dad, Tim. The irony of their dynamic is that they feel worlds apart despite their relationship suggesting they should be closer.
Well, all your technology stuff ends in disaster.
Tim doesn't understand Flint and honestly wishes his son would just give up and take over the family shop. The fact that they are at odds with each other makes the father-son tension the film's emotional center. So, the real climax of the movie, which is Tim finally telling his son that he's proud of him, hits harder than any falling cheeseburger.
Someone as ordinary as me could be the father of someone as extraordinary as you.
This type of character depth seemed to have been written as if rent was due for the writers. And here's the funny part, that's exactly what happened. Directors Phil Lord and Chris Miller were told by the studio to rework the script to have more emotional grounding or risk being fired for the second time. Mind you, this movie was made in the middle of the 2008 financial crisis. Hence, the directors had no choice but to lock in. Tim was supposed to be nothing more than a fill-in character, a tackle shop owner with no key role in the story's stakes. But not only did they make him the protagonist's father, but they created a premise for daddy issues and a reason for the audience to feel emotions more than humor. And this single minor change might have been the difference between a cult classic and an animated disaster. While Flint's masterpiece of a character was a product of chance and a rewrite, Sony's hero in Arthur Christmas was well crafted. This movie takes their newfound willingness to take creative risks and channels it into one of their most heartfelt stories. The premise of this movie isn't a direct ripoff from Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, but you can tell that the studio was going with a formula that proved successful. What really sells this story as real is the state of dysfunction of the Santa family. The movie treats the role of Santa like a family business passed down from generation to generation. And with that comes all the dysfunction of a real holiday gathering. The family dynamic feels familiar in the best way. The awkward dinners, the rivalry between siblings, and the clash of old traditions versus new ideas. It's about how families struggle to understand each other. And at the center of it all is Arthur, the son no one really takes seriously. He's clumsy, overlooked, and underestimated, the kind of family member who plays the role of the clown to keep the peace. His brother Steve is the polar opposite. He's confident, practical, obsessed with technology, and fully prepared to take over as Santa. The conflict between them on the surface seems like nothing more than a sibling rivalry. But it's more than that. It's a battle of values. Steve believes efficiency is everything, while Arthur believes empathy matters most, even if it looks messy and inconvenient.
After all the hard work, I wanted everyone to have some Christmas fun.
What makes Arthur special is that his heroism comes from exactly the thing others see as his weakness. He doesn't have the brains or the authority to run Christmas. What he does have is an unshakable belief that every single child counts. And he proves it by going to the ends of the earth to deliver a single forgotten gift. His decision is deeply human, and it makes him a rare kind of animated hero, one defined by pure compassion and determination.
No! Santa's the most caring man in the world!
Sony seemed to have found the cheat code of writing dynamic heroes, a mix of family drama and unique qualities of the protagonist. Hence, in 2012, a year after Arthur Christmas was released, Hotel Transylvania hit the box office. Its hero, Dracula, also managed to escape the generic trope. So, if Sony knew what they had to do to create great heroes, why didn't they just do it all the time? Well, the truth is, if there's one thing we've come to know about Sony animations, it's that they lack consistency in many aspects, including their visual style, animation, and even their culture. While Pixar champions emotional story-first films, DreamWorks leans on humor and marketable franchises, and Disney sticks to broad appeal with polished fairy tale arcs. Sony is everywhere. They might give you something fluid and vibrant like Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs today, and tomorrow you get over-the-top movements in Hotel Transylvania, which are reminiscent of Looney Tunes. This inconsistency with Sony is all reflected by their heroes. Well, at least this is not until they had a major breakthrough. Luckily for everyone, it looks like they will never go back to their old generic heroes because this movie marked a leap in storytelling so good that it made looking back impossible. To create this masterpiece, the studio called the attention of two guys who had almost lost their jobs some years ago, Phil Lord and Christopher Miller. They came together to make Into the Spider-Verse. Here, Sony stopped guessing and started showing us how to make a modern hero that actually feels like a person you know. That shift is why the film landed so hard with critics and audiences, and why it walked away with the Best Animated Feature Film at the Oscars in 2019.
Thank you, Academy.
Thank you, Sony.
Miles Morales as a character may not be a new IP, but what Sony did with him is something the cinematic world has never seen before. This type of character writing can't be the product of a quick rewrite or an attempt at a cheap cash grab. Every detail about Miles Morales was carefully thought out and crafted. In this movie, we're greeted by a kid whose life is a dichotomy, a paradox, if you will. He has a father cop, yet he's closer to his criminal uncle. He's a smart nerd, yet he hates school and has the swagger of one of the cool kids. And as far as being a superhero is concerned, there's already a Spider-Man in his universe, so there really isn't any need for him to try to be one.
I thought I was the only one. You're like me.
I don't want to be.
He seems like he fits a certain stereotype, yet he's quite the opposite. This gives the term misfit a whole new meaning, and what makes it even more poetic is the fact that the characters that accompany Miles throughout the course of the movie don't even belong in his world. But it takes more than just throwing in good characters to make a good story. One interesting thing about Miles' misfortune is that he's a victim of his own choices rather than his circumstances. People had to die because he mistakenly became Spider-Man. Worthy of note were his uncle and Peter Parker, the real Spider-Man of his universe. It seemed everything was his fault, but he still has our sympathy. Once again, a character dichotomy that doesn't just exist randomly.
Like it was my fault.
You wouldn't understand.
These negative emotions, in turn, create a strong desire and sense of conviction to do right by the people he lost. This is noble and heroic, but it doesn't feel cliché because of how the characters' motives were shaped in the first half of the movie. However, with so much detail spent on Miles as the main character, where does that leave the rest of the cast? They can't have this same spotlight that Miles has, yet the writers didn't treat that as an excuse to make them lackluster. They still gave them depth where they could. Spider-Ham, Penny Parker, and Spider-Man Noir didn't get as much screen time compared to Peter B. Parker or Gwen Stacy, but we learn from the latter two why they have so much chemistry with Miles. Gwen is a young superhero in a world that's not hers, and Peter B. Parker's depressive state makes him a mentor with a fulfilling arc.
How do I know I'm not gonna mess it up again? You won't. Right.
By the end of Into the Spider-Verse, Miles Morales completes a journey that separates him from every generic hero template. Instead of raw power or some preordained destiny, he wins because he learns to trust himself in a world that kept telling him he wasn't ready. His leap of faith, captured in that unforgettable upside-down swing through New York, is the embodiment of his growth.
Like, what's up, danger?
The boy who once froze under pressure and doubted his place among other spider heroes becomes the one who saves them all by embracing his own rhythm, his own style, and his own identity. His story is about stumbling, failing, and rising with authenticity. That is what makes Miles stand apart, and why his arc is one of the strongest arguments that Sony has finally learned how to craft heroes who feel truly alive. This works because at the end of the day, no matter how influenced by your surroundings we are as humans, it's our choices that ultimately determine our fate, be it good or bad. After the success of Into the Spider-Verse, Sony had carved out a lane for themselves. They had a signature style for both their stories and their heroes, and with their newfound style, they finally had the real cheat code and were going to use it as much as they could. 2021's The Mitchells vs. the Machines was released 3 years after Into the Spider-Verse, and it was produced by frequent collaborators Phil Lord and Christopher Miller. Yep, the same duo that had worked on Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs and a couple of Lego movies. So maybe Miller and Lord are actually the cheat code here, right? Anyway, this Sony project featured Katie Mitchell, a young girl aspiring to be a filmmaker, much to the dismay of her dad.
You know, like part of the plan I was talking to her.
The plot is basically progressed by the Mitchells making inherent choices. As much as there is an overlying story of saving the world, there's another one going on, a more personal one hinged on the choices these characters end up making. Because, just like Miles, Katie may seem like she's put into the world she lives in, but ultimately shaped as a result of her choices. And how did the audience react? Well, a 97% Rotten Tomato rating with an 81 average score on Metacritic means this piece of IP is proof that Sony's new style of writing heroes is working. And with over 50 million homes watching this movie in its first month of release, it means that the studio really is heading in the right direction with their heroes. But in 2025, they decided to take it a step further with K-pop Demon Hunters. At first, it seems it's contrary to what makes Miles Morales and Katie Mitchell unique. Everything seems fixed.
The world will know you as pop stars, but you will be much more than that. You'll be hunters.
Demon Hunters are apparently a thing that has been going on for generations, and this leaves little room for nuance and characters to be seen as misfits. Well, that is until it's revealed that Rumi has ties with the same entities she's been destined to wage war against. This is the type of paradox new age Sony heroes get put in. It forces them to make compelling choices that reveal their deepest desires as characters.
I have a plan to erase them. Gino was supposed to... Gino? You're working with?
You could say that Rumi may have been tricked into working with the demons. However, she did want her voice back. That desire made her start questioning whether the demons were truly the villains. The choices she made were messy and destructive, yet they carried weight because they came from her own inner struggle, instead of just to push the plot forward. By the end of the story, the heroes stand out because their journeys are about resolving personal conflicts in a way that feels authentic. Ultimately, each hero finishes their arc in a concrete, earned way. Rumi is exposed and pushed to the edge, but she refuses to hide anymore and sings the truth, turning her shame into power and standing in the open as her full self. When the main villain, Guima, fires a killing beam at her, Jinu, who has been the misunderstood villain, sacrifices his regained soul and transfers it into Rumi, saving her and completing his own fall and redemption arc. He admits he lied, confesses the cost, and then gives what he can to set things right. Mira and Zoe, who had been manipulated into doubt and betrayal, come back together with Rumi during the final song. Their voices and choices break the hypnotic spell and turn the crowd against the Saja boys' spectacle. The Hanmoon collapses and the false idols fall, but the girls survive, heal, and reclaim their music and friendship. K-pop Demon Hunters and Into the Spider-Verse were released 7 years apart, yet the heroes share fundamental traits. If this style of writing heroes wasn't working, Sony would have stopped using it, but it doesn't look like they ever would. Now that you know why Sony heroes are superior, this would be a good time to check out our other video to find out exactly what happens when the hero is wrong.